Well, still on that theme, EOH Holdings has created an app that will make that process easier for future whistleblowers. It comes after the South African IT company reeled following an anonymous complaint that prompted Microsoft to abruptly cancel partner agreements with it. But even outside the corporate world, whistleblowers are featured strongly in the various inquiries underway. So is the power shifting in favour of whistleblowers? Brian Hatting is the founder of potential leadership firm SICAN, and he joins me now. Brian, thanks indeed for coming.
It's a real pleasure, thank you.
Are there more people coming forward to expose corrupt dealings, or are we just seeing more platforms becoming available? Again, I assume the two are related.
So I think one needs to separate it into two camps. You've got the whistleblowers who either have had a sudden sear of conscience or more likely have recognized that they're in for trouble and they decide that they want to find an easy way out, and maybe there has been a period where it's become increasingly uncomfortable to be in the space that they're in. But then you get the people who come from a place of integrity and authenticity, who've been seeing what's going on, but are standing alone, really, essentially. There are no user groups inside of companies for whistleblowers at this point in time. So it takes a lot of courage, it takes bravery, and I think that the whole issue of whistleblowing is really an imperative, and I think that it is increasing, and I think that as it suddenly becomes seen that this is actually an acceptable practice and a celebrated practice. I said once before that we should actually rename it. Whistleblowers are referees who stop the flow of play and give yellow and red cards. I think we should call it truth ambassadors or truth champions or something along those lines. There should be an award for authenticity in organizations. But I think it speaks to a much deeper underlying issue that we need to move towards, which is that of optimism and bringing about a sense of bravery and courage in people to actually stand up for what's right and to recognize that if we don't do this, our country is not going to continue to build a sustainable, inclusive space.
So you get companies rushing for interventions. Some of them may be doing it for a long time, but if you take one company that I just mentioned who goes ahead and launches an app, I'm just wondering, how much more different is that when a couple of years ago, perhaps even more than a decade, we've had emails used as platforms? How different is the app?
That's a really good question. I haven't seen it. This is the first time I've heard of it. So it'll be interesting to see. I think what would be important is if one looks at the Protected Disclosure Act and particularly the amendments of 2017, which now allows to give protection not only to employees but to workers of any sort, consultants or whatever, into an organization, and sort of lays out a framework for people to do so. I think the more that people investigate it and know about what their recourse is and what their protection is, and an app, possibly if it's a mobile app particularly, might be able to give people that sense of comfort that they can step forward and do it.
I mean, you alluded to this in your earlier answer, that companies have to produce a conducive environment, a fertile ground for people to report on corruption. Is South Africa generally doing pretty well in this regard, you think?
No, I don't think so at all. In fact, I think that the pervasive degree of corruption has been so huge. It's almost like a cancer. Gangrene, when you get gangrene in your little toe, if you leave it around for too long, it'll take your foot and then your leg, and then it moves all over the body. Now all of a sudden you want to start fixing it. So I don't think it's an easy issue, but I think one can accelerate it. If you use examples of Giuliani, if we look at, for example, in Rwanda, Paul Kagame introduced something called umuganda, which is a legislation that the last Saturday of every month, everybody, including the president, goes out and picks up litter. The consequence is that Rwanda is now one of the cleanest countries in the world. And in fact, what really interested me was there was a quote from a couple of the citizens when asked about it. They said, well, even though it's policed, it's actually become lifestyle. So what's interesting is how quickly people can transition in that. If one looks at the beautiful example of Costa Rica. Costa Rica, a couple of decades ago, had been where its surface area had been 70% rainforest, got down to 20% rainforest. They've reestablished that to beyond 50%. And the Presidente Carlos Quesada, who's only 39 years of age, has initiated that they will become the first carbon zero country in the world. They've now pledged in government that they are going to become a zero use of fossils country, which is fantastic. So, I don't think it's impossible. It's about creating a contagion, and it's about leaders standing up and being counted.
And just before I let you go, I'm just wondering that, it's easy for whistleblowers to get protection in the so-called metropole areas. There's something corporate, there's something manageable about that, but you still hear these tragic stories of how people are assassinated politically or in a corporate sense around these outlying rural or less metropole areas, KZN, Eastern Cape, for example. So there's a bias in terms of protection, I would think.
And I think that indeed, very definitely so. And I think that there needs to be more time and attention given to it, and a sufficient enough task force to look at how one can create an end-to-end framework that takes into account those different dynamics of rural versus urban, and the less structure and the less protection and governance that you'll find inside of rural, so that people can be protected.
Brian Hatting from SAICAN, thanks very much indeed
Kevin, thank
for
you.
talking to us.